Hello, this is Brian Von Axelson, and I'm an Office 365 partner lead in the U.S. Office Division for Microsoft. In today's Drumbeat session, we're going to take a look and have a conversation around how do I pitch to my customers. But before we get started, we want to take a look at a video. Roll the video. That was a great look at not only some of the statistics around Office 365, but emphasizing the adoption from our customers and our partners around Office 365 in the marketplace. As we can see, the cloud is transforming. I really look at it that we've gone mainstream with cloud. So we're moving out of that early adoption phase and moving into the mainstream phase, not only for the cloud, but for Microsoft with Office 365. And as we think about that transformation, I'd like to highlight a couple key statistics to think about as you engage with your customers. From the cloud perspective, there's been over 10,000 new federal and industry regulations created in the last 5 years. And quite honestly, over 90% of employees admit to violating some of those compliance policies. From a social perspective, approximately 50% of work requires network contribution. And when I talk about network contribution, it's not about connecting to the Wi-Fi and contribution. It's your peer network. How do you work socially and collaborate? But as we think about it, quite honestly, 80%, 4 out of 5, are ineffective at collaboration. From a mobility perspective, 75% of organizations allow personal mobile devices for business use. But unfortunately, only 24% have a BYOD policy in place. And as we think about big data, 40% growth in the global data generated. It's just exploding. But again, 62% of organizations really struggle to make use of that information. We're not tapping into the knowledge and looking at it for our decision-making process. Now, as we get started, you're going to notice that the pitch deck is quite different than the pitch deck that we've had in the past. And it's quite the evolved conversation. And I really love it, and I'm glad I'm here to share it with you today from a partner perspective. So what has changed? Well, quite honestly, the old pitch was very feature, function, centric type of conversation. And it was awesome. It highlighted some of the great capabilities that we have in Office 365 as we think about, how do we filter our mail? How do we send that information to the deleted inbox while filtering the conversation? And it was great when we looked at it from that feature functionality. But just as you have evolved with your conversations with your customers, it's much less about the feature functionality. And it's also who you're having those conversations with. The CEO, the business owner, the CFO, the CIO. We've evolved the conversation from the IT department. We've evolved the conversation from that feature functionality. What we found is those C-levels, they don't really care about that clutter button. What they care about is, how are you going to enable my company? How are you going to make my users, my employees, more productive? So we start to look at changing the conversation just as the world has changed. As we think about things that have happened in the industry, we look at some of those statistics. Many of us will relate to the consumerization of IT, think about BYOD, and really look at how our personal lives are now slices in time during our work lives. And then during our personal time, quite honestly, how slices of our work time get involved with our personal time. And what I mean by that is, if we look at our day, from the time that we get up to the time that we go to bed, with our connected devices, we are floating in and out of our different personalities. We may have our career personality, we may have our personal personality, we may have additional personalities with our community, our civic, our schools, whatever we're choosing to participate in. But these are slices of time throughout the day. And quite honestly, they intersect one another. I know that I have been at basketball games and track meets with my children, and I have my mobile phone, and I'm syncing email and just making sure that nobody needs anything, or if there's something I can address quickly, and I have that opportunity because of the device and of my connectivity. And that's what I mean as we think about these different slices. So as we look at the consumerization IT, the BYOD conversation, what are the opportunities? Typically, as we think about moving to the cloud, the first thing to go is email. I think every C-level business owner will be more than happy to remove those mail servers and the burden of not only running the email, but keeping it up and running. And so what we've typically seen is that the first thing to go is email. However, email really is the plumbing. It's the back end to many things that we do. Now, as we start to look at enabling the users and answering the questions that our C-levels have of, how are you going to enable my employees? It's, what can we do to share files, to collaborate? What can we do if I want to go through multiple devices? And again, think of cloud as an enabler as I transition between different devices and sometimes even different platforms. And really look at that multiple device conversation, not only from a licensing perspective, but quite honestly, look at it from the customer experience conversation. How can I transcend the different devices that are within an organization, but be productive with the tools from Office 365? And then finally, social. How do we collaborate? How do we work together? How do we tap into the knowledge that each of us have? I like to do a icebreaker game that kind of identifies with this collaboration. So if you've ever played the game where you write a letter up on the board and then you have everybody sit down, and one of the ones I've done is give us the animals that start with a particular letter. Well, of course, we each have our own list. But what is really cool is when we go and put that list on the whiteboard and we start to see the sum of others is much greater than the individual contribution. And that's really what we like to look at when we start to think about working like a network and collaborating. Now, as we move into the new pitch deck, the graphics have been picked specifically. We're actually looking at doing a case study. I hope that Microsoft produces that on actually creating this deck. But it was meant to express some of the things that are happening in the industry. Here, it's very specific around the modern student and how, quite honestly, things have changed. Expectations for workers have changed. And we start to think about that, quite honestly, half the employees really are retiring in the next 5 years for many companies. As we start to look at, for the first time, there's 4 generations in the workplace. And as we think about these different generations, we all look at technology a little bit different, and we have different expectations. But we're bringing in not only millennials, but also new employees straight from the campus. We look at consumer technologies, and they've moved very fast and rapid. And we start to look at, again, wrapping ourselves around the consumer technologies into the secure business environment. But some of those technologies lead to the way that each of us use technology. As we think about, some of the younger generations, younger than myself, I think of the social conversation, and how they work from a social medium versus email. Then we start to look at how the brain has actually developed, because many of these in the younger generation have been working in social. The multitasking is phenomenal. I'm just amazed sometimes at the multitasking, because they've grown up with it and they can float between the different tasks very easily because it's just become second nature to them. And so it's really looking at, how do we open up the conversation around the experience and enabling all generations to use the different technology as they want to, as they become accustomed to. As we think about some of the K-12, again, thinking about the student perspective, quite honestly, as we look at the machines that are in many of the academic spaces, they don't have a hard drive. And so here you have people like myself that have traditionally saved to the local hard drive or even a network drive. And then we have some in the K-12 right now that, quite honestly, are like, well, why would I save locally? I won't have access to it when I go home. And again, that reiterates the different ways that we use technology and using cloud as an enabler so that we can have that seamless experience across the different devices. As we continue the conversation, not only do we have connectivity, we have multiple devices where we're at, but quite honestly, the world has become a giant network. And people are really hyper-connected more than ever before. Again, we see this in our personal lives. We talk to our friends, family using Facebook. We get the latest news from people across the globe on Twitter. We find the next career opportunity in LinkedIn. Information and knowledge move faster than ever. But we're able to accomplish more together because we are connected. So in the spirit of working like a network, we have a great video that kind of highlights this conversation.
Today, people are more connected than ever before, through social networks, through the cloud, through mobile devices. The world has become a giant network. And every second, people are sharing, learning, and making decisions on the go. They're all part of one hyper-connected world. These are your customers. They expect faster responses, personalized service, better experiences. As a business, you have to always be listening to your customers. Anticipate trends, take action, and adapt quickly no matter what comes your way, so you can always stay one step ahead. You need the latest information at your fingertips to make fully informed decisions. And as a business, you can give your customers exactly what they want, when they want it. so they walk away with experiences as unique as they are. What if you were connected to everything important? What if you and every person in your company could work together like a network? Suddenly, you're plugged into everything that matters to your business. You're social and collaborating in new ways, exchanging ideas with people across the globe. You're always listening to your employees, customers, and partners. You spot new opportunities to adapt quickly and make change happen. You share documents and information in real time and make decisions faster than ever. When you're working together as one connected network, you can grow your business. You understand your customers, you build better products, and you deliver the best experiences. This is the power of a network. Now's the time to start working like one.
So that was a great video taking a look at how we can work like a network. So let's apply that to our conversation today. One of the first themes we want to look at is that ubiquitous collaboration. Now again, very similar to the modern student as we looked at that particular graphic. This graphic was chosen because it really shows some of the flow of information, the flow of how we work. One of the things I like to call out, if we can look over there on the right-hand side, you'll see an ad hoc meeting that's going on, where many of us have had many of those ad hoc meetings. We can see that represented by the individuals there at the high top meeting together. Then check out the dude on the beanbag. So we have a dude on the beanbag down there, and he's in that anywhere access mode. That he, as long as he has connectivity, he can connect in, he can get to his information, he can work, he can collaborate, but really representing that anywhere access type conversation. Then also notice that we still have desks as we move over to the left-hand side, where many of us, continue to, have a desk type environment, and that's an office setting. So really trying to capture what I like to call the speed of work, that we have these different ways that we engage with one another. We have different ways that we can attack our tasks that we need to accomplish. Now, as we think about some of this from an Office 365 perspective, some of the things that we look at, we talked about earlier with the never save to hard drive, but we also have that digital content is now native. We may never print it out, that it's been created, that it's being consumed, and it's being utilized all in a digital format. That we can follow a shared idea from the beginning through the process of bringing that to the market. One example that we think of, is some of the things that I hope you've taken advantage of. We have an Office Lens app that is available for all phone platforms, as we think about Android, iOS, and of course Windows Phone. And with that app, you can take a picture of the whiteboard. Now, not only does it clean up the contrast and every piece of information there, but it also takes the picture and puts it into OneNote, which allows it to be searchable. So a great example of collaborating, working, bringing content, even though we created it on a whiteboard, into a digital format, and then being able to work with that digital content, and maybe it is that shared idea from the beginning that we're taking to the market. What does this give us? Well, it changes not only the way we work, but the way we work with others. We have the ability to iterate early and often, that there's no hoarding of information. Quite honestly, we moved towards what we consider crowdsourcing ideas, and that is the story behind ubiquitous collaboration. As we think about the next chapter, think about some of the things from Satya. 212 billion sensors and devices and things by 2020. Again, this was a quote from our CEO, Satya. 212 billion sensors, devices, and things by 2020. More devices, more sensors equals more data. We think about what is the individual impact of that information personally. Email, social, real time. And again, my human capacity seems to be the same. And quite honestly, with my memory fading a little, it may actually be going down. But all this information flowing in, it's additive sources versus replacing. It's lots of things. Connected devices, trends, data points, communications, our inbox, our IM, our social. I still look at how do I connect and bring the different pieces of information together, centralized into one place. Quite honestly, we can't see the forest for the trees, right? We struggle between unstructured data and structured data. The focus is to look at how we can take this information and make it easier for the end user. And again, we start to look at using personal BI, using some of the tools and the resources, not only from the client as we think about Excel, but as we think about some of the capabilities with SharePoint Online. You know, those are the types of conversations as we look at how do we aggregate. A great example of this is with one of the racing teams that we have a small sponsorship, but they have typically 2 cars on the track at any one time, and they're typically traveling well over 40% of the year. There's literally 1 billion data points on the car every race. 25 meg of that is streamed back to the pits every lap, and actually making real-time decisions during a race and evaluating the information being brought in from these different sensors. So this is one of the Formula One cars that's out there, and encourage you to take a look at the Lotus F1 team. And there's some different information out on YouTube, of course on the Microsoft site, and of course Formula One, with it being the Lotus F1 team. So a great example of how they're using our solutions, there's a case study on them as well, to actually look at making real-time use and personalizing the data live during an F1 race. Which ties into our next theme as we think about that personalized insight. What can we do from a machine learning conversation, that personalization? What are we doing from the BI perspective? Some of the things that we looked at is that there's some machine learning from an Azure perspective, but also some of the capabilities as we think about Oslo. As we think about comparing our Explorer versus Oslo, it's personalized. It's the difference between information finding me or me finding the info. As we think about spreadsheets versus Q&A and insight, 90% of people making decisions, but only 10% have the tools to get the right info. We've created a great natural language interface where we can talk to our information. We have the ability to type in questions and get the answers from within the spreadsheet. So great ways to take advantage of personal BI as we think about Powergraph, the different tools from Oslo, and really look at how do we personalize the information? Because we know many people are making decisions. When I think about BI, I've always thought about, do I have the right information at the right time to make the right decision? If I fail in the first two, I'm only going to get lucky if I make the right decision. Now, as we think about the conversation around personal BI, enabling our users, the explosion of devices. This brings underpinning a threat that faces our customers, that proliferation of devices with all that content that we're enabling with. How do we wipe and protect the data? A great example of this we saw in the recent past here in the US with a data breach at Target and what happened with the CEO and some of the C-level executives actually being asked to resign. And it really brought to the forefront the security conversation. Now, as we think about enabling our users on how to work, how, where, when, it does include some additional risk. I travel a fair amount in the United States and Canada, and I'm amazed that just about every single time I'm at the airport, I usually hear it a couple times, not just once, but a couple times. Will the traveler that left a laptop at security checkpoint A please return and collect your belongings? We see laptops, we see different devices, tablets, phones being left at airports, being left in taxis, being left in the back pockets of the airplane seat that's in front of you. So how do we really look at building that trade-off as we think about agility and security, as we think about productive and compliance? There has to be a balance that we have to walk. How do we enable users to be productive on the devices they love, but again, protecting the company content on those devices? Our focus must be first on delivering the end user the absolute best experience possible on all their devices. So as we look at how do we reach that compliance, we need to look at it from a people-centric compliance. And how can we enable the users? Again, if we go back to the statistics at the beginning, 90% of the employees admit to breaking corporate compliance policies. If we try and put up barriers, people are going to find ways around it. I've talked to different partners that find rogue access points in the days when we were removing internet connectivity. We really need to make the customer experience part of the conversation. Make encryption with ease of use. Make policies such as DLP. DLP is available in our enterprise editions, and it stands for data loss prevention. A great example is you can put a policy in place that recognizes credit card information. And then it can decide what to do from a policy perspective. Maybe it's a warning to the end user that, hey, I recognize there's credit card information. Maybe it's a policy that the email doesn't go out the email server. But you have that control and you have that feedback mechanism to the user, to the customer. But really looking at it from a people-centric compliancy story. So as we wrap up the new pitch, it's around these three pillars as we think about the ubiquitous collaboration, the personalized insight, and the people-centric compliance around the modern workplace. So that covers the majority of the new pitch as we think about ubiquitous collaboration, personalized insight, and people-centric compliance. Now I kind of want to move into having the conversation with business decision makers as well as handling customer objections, and where we at Microsoft have identified the top 3 objections and kind of cover off on some of those. As we think about the cloud conversation and talking to business decision makers, again, wrap it around some of these different pillars as we think about that mobile productivity, really key in on some of the different devices and how Office 365 supports not only the Microsoft platform, but iOS and Android, both from a tablet perspective as well as from a phone perspective. Also, I'd highlight that during that productivity, you mentioned the multiple installs. Again, 5 PCs or Mac per user. That's a huge value proposition as we think about how to be productive across multiple devices. Really look at that from a CIO perspective and how you can embrace some BYOD, as well as what we can do from an engagement perspective, and really look at exciting the customers because they can use multiple platforms. When we think about that social and that collaboration, really we look at the VP from an HR perspective, or even a VP from the communications portion. Maybe it's a PR leader as well. And we really look at that employee engagement. Not only working together, but also socializing the information about the company and bringing employees together from that perspective. Also, we want to be responsive to customers. So, maybe we look at a marketing conversation as well, and how we can listen and react quicker to feedback. And we've seen that some great examples as customers are utilizing some of the different social tools to gather that information and insight from customers and respond. In fact, we've done a lot of things at Microsoft with the continuous evolution of Office based on feedback from customers and partners as yourself. As we think about that personalized insight, really targeting the CEO and really looking at that business perspective and how the CEO as well as his leaders can be enabled by that personalization of the data. That many of the leaders are making business critical decisions, that they can have the right information to make those appropriate decisions. As we think about productivity, here we're keying in on the VP of sales and really looking at our buying patterns. How do we look at driving top line revenue? And of course, cross-sell, upsell is like what we like to call it at Microsoft, but increasing the actual deal size. And again, we look at using the different tools on the different devices from a productivity perspective and enabling the sales force, which many times is remote, to be enabled to do some great presentations and information, even though they're not in the office. So again, looking at that connected experience, but able to deliver the value that your customer is offering to their customers from that remote mobile sales professional. We often get conversations about enterprise grade cloud and conversations between consumer versus business, and really looking at how organizations are looking to the cloud to change not only how they buy and consume IT, but also how IT actually impacts the business. Again, as we mentioned, email, many leaders are willing to remove email very quickly. But it's no longer just about the lower upfront cost. As we think about the email perspective, we're looking at that agility, freeing up resources to focus on innovation versus running and maintaining the systems. Again, we've been building enterprise class solutions for a number of decades. Along with Office 365, we have other cloud services such as Windows Azure, the CRM Online. We have some consumer offerings as we think about Outlook.com, our OneDrive for consumers, of course, Bing, Skype, and Xbox Live, just to name a few. And again, we've been able to benefit from the diversity of those services, both looking at the consumer environment as well as the business enterprise environment. Leverage best practices from each of the different processes. And again, Microsoft is the only one that delivers that complete cloud choice. We can help customers lower cost, gain efficiency, and have the ability to improve security and compliance. So as we've taken feedback from customers and partners, we have been able to group, using the 80-20 rule, customer objections into 3 key categories. And then we find most of the other objections in that 20% falling in the all other case. The first one is around cloud trust and security. The cloud is new to me. I don't trust it. What do you mean my information is not going to be on premise? Data sovereignty. I don't know how my data is handled. Who's accessing it? Is it secure? And then, of course, service updates and continuity. Used to having control and updating the on-premises software. If I lose control, if I don't get informed, what happens when the Office 365 service is updated? Is it going to break things? What's going to happen if the service is interrupted? What does that mean for me as a customer? So let's take a look at some of those objections. First, we want to talk a little bit about redundancy and financially backed SLA, service level agreement. So hopefully some of you have been able to actually tour a data center. I'd encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity if you have it. But just some things to think about. We have tank traps. We have spy tubes. That's where you go into a chamber and get authorized, the door behind you shuts, and then as you're authorized, the door in front of you opens. That while you're in that spy tube, you're actually being sniffed for explosives. And then this one's really cool. We actually weigh you. We know how much you weigh. Now, we're not posting that out on Facebook, but we use that when you leave. You come back through and you get weighed again, and they better match. So I hope you guys don't, eat a whole bag of Oreos while you're in the data center. But seriously, it's about some of that compliancy, some of those security protocols that we've put into place. We have the most dark fiber, and think of dark fiber as super fast connectivity between different locations within the data center, which allows us to bring up content delivery modes and have a private network between the different data centers. So really ways to connect and get to your information through our investments in dark fiber. So as we think about the security concerns, content moving to the cloud, being stored, we also have security protocols in place. You just can't go in and access a server and get to the data. There's specific guidelines and protocols that have to take place. And part of that is permission from the customer. Multiple managers involved of a particular employee to actually go and access the information. And then a scope of work around what they can access. It's just not, hey, here is your customer server. I need to go do this to the server. That does not happen. So some great information that we'll continue to talk about as we think about the Trust Center, but also take a look at some of the videos that are available on the internet around the Microsoft data centers. It'll give you a good glimpse into not only what and how we have built the data centers, but also some of the controls that have been put into place as well. As we think about the trust conversation, I want to highlight the Trust Center. Again, that's Office 365 Trust Center, but also looking at the security, the compliance, the privacy. As we think about the productivity services to help users get done virtually anywhere, we need to maintain that security in the face of the evolving threats. Office 365 supports the different needs with that highly secure cloud-based productivity platform. And again, a great resource for you and your customers is to take a look at the information out on the Trust Center. So let's first take a look at security. And I've kind of talked a little about some of the physical and data security access control, but really looking at best-in-class security. Again, as we mentioned, we've been delivering cloud services both from a consumer and an enterprise-grade cloud for a number of years. Best practices that we use, defense in depth. I used to be a TechNet presenter back in the day, and remember going through the defense in depth methodologies as we think about 2003. But really taking some of those best practices, the penetration testing, what can we do to protect against the different threats? And then also that unique customer controls, we think about the rights management services and empowering the customers, as we've talked about, to protect their information as well. Next, let's take a look at compliancy. I still get questions around HIPAA, and Office 365 has been HIPAA compliant for a very long time, but questions still come in from partners and customers around HIPAA compliancy. We also achieved the EU certification, which is a high bar that's been set by the EU, higher than some of the US standards. So even though it's not a US compliancy, it is a great conversation piece around Microsoft's commitment to compliancy and some of the things that we have achieved by interjecting that we did achieve the EU certification, even though you're talking about the United States. Also following the ISO rigorous standards. And remember that some of our competitors, they call out that they follow ISO-like standards. Again, committing to private security, handling of the customer data through contract. How are we working through the data processing, and then making sure that we have the agreements in place to protect the information. And then again, admin controls, again, enabling the admin from the perspective of the customer, DLP, legal hold, e-discovery, all designed to enable the customer's admin, or you as the partner being the admin, to have certain controls in place for the data. And lastly, let's talk a little bit about privacy. Now, as we look at the difference between consumer cloud offerings and business offerings, remember that at Microsoft, with our business offerings from an Office 365 perspective, that there's no mining of data for advertising. I often recommend to partners to have that conversation with their customers as they're looking at consumer grade offerings. As we think about consumer grade offerings, what I challenge you to do is to actually ask, what is the product? Many times when it's a consumer grade offering, that you are the actual product. The free service is just there to get access to you being the product through the advertising that's going to be put into your environment. So again, no mining of data for advertising. Transparency with the location. We have multiple data centers and the transparency to see where the customer data and who has access under certain circumstances. And then of course the privacy controls to regulate the sharing of sites, libraries, folders, and communications with our external parties as well. So some capabilities to limit the surface area as we look at regulating the different sites and libraries. So this kind of shows some of the key pillars as we think about our Office 365 Trust from a security, compliance, and privacy. We also have a screenshot of the updated Trust Center that was refreshed this past summer. So I'd encourage again everybody to go out to trust.office365.com. Take a look at the different resources. We also have our aggregate total of uptime on there as well. But this is a phenomenal resource not only for you as a partner, but encourage your customers to go out to the Trust Center as well. So let's take a quick look at a video that talks a little bit about our data centers and your data.
The hard statement that we like to make and are working hard to engineering the system is that right now, if the system, if the service is working properly, nobody has access to your data. There is literally zero access, standing access for human beings to your data if it's sitting in our cloud.
Compare that to the IT admin in a traditional IT shop where they are having long-standing permissions. So if I am an administrator, I'm going to be an administrator for every day of my life being an administrator. I have super powerful permissions. I can go and remove mailboxes, I can move them from one spot to the other, I can do all that stuff. But long-standing permissions are quite dangerous. What if they left the window open and somebody else came by and typed in the wrong command and did something dangerous? it is super interesting for us to go solve this problem, particularly on online services, because our engineers do need the ability to go solve problems.
In the context of an incident, where there's awareness across a number of set of people that that incident is going on in the service, then you can go to a set of workflow that we call Lockbox that through software allows you to request escalation to the predefined set of privileges for your role.
So what Lockbox does is that it allows them the ability to elevate, and that ability to elevate, that approval, comes from somebody else in the environment. What I like to think about is when we designed Lockbox, it was kind of like turning the two keys in order to go do something dangerous, right? So you have the president and you have the Joint Chiefs individually turning different keys in order to go take some severe action. We have the same philosophy in the data center.
There's always this holy grail of creating roles-based access control systems in both on-premise and in cloud systems. But there's a big difference between the machinery having access and the individuals working with to keep the service running having access to read your data. If you go after that, you can start building the system so that all the tools that are available to you are about diagnosing the health of the system and fixing it. And the machinery, in doing that, may in fact require read and write access to the underlying machinery, but the human being operating on the verbs doesn't have access to that.
It is impossible for one person to go do something serious, like it is on the on-premise environment. On-premise is super easy for one person to be malicious. For that to happen in the online service, that's a conspiracy, because you have to convince somebody else to be in cahoots with you in order to go turn the two keys.
As part of the process, the requests are logged, all the activities with those escalated privileges are logged, and those logs are reviewed by human beings and by automatic systems to try and detect interesting patterns.
Every single time somebody elevates, we know why they elevated, and we can pick out that behavior and say, I know somebody who just did something invasive. It's really easy for us to tell the outliers. So a combination of the auditing and tracking, as well as the two turnkey system, as well as the very default roles, which really only give you troubleshooting access, combination of these three things for Lockbox ensure that only the right people have only the right access at the right time and no standing permissions ever.
That was a great video taking a look at the data in the data centers. So let's move on to the second topic, which is data sovereignty. And questions around my data. How's it handled? How's it secured in the cloud? I'm concerned about my data. Is it being kept private? Who can access it without my knowledge? So Microsoft does respond to government legal demands for customer data. However, your customers will be involved in that conversation. When it is appropriate, it will be redirected, and Microsoft has successfully redirected a few number of requests. We've also worked with a customer where we have had to work with a government entity on just a handful of requests around responding to the government demands for the customer data. However, the customer is fully involved in the entire process. And again, the numbers that I'm aware of are less than a handful. And when you think about the scope of Office 365, the number of customers that are on that, it's a very small percentage in the decimal points. And then of course, as we kind of mentioned, with EU approving and giving us their highest certification, they also approve of the privacy commitments as well. And again, just reiterating the standards, meeting both in the United States as well as the EU. For more information, there's again some links out there. You can get to it as we look at the Trust Center, but if you go out to aka.ms Office 365 data or Office 365 privacy, some more information from a data sovereignty perspective. What about service updates? Things change. In fact, we've delivered hundreds of updates since the launch of what we know as our on-premise Office 2013 versus Office Professional Plus. If you think about the on-prem version versus what we have in Office 365, there is a difference because we are continually updating and adding new features and functionalities and capabilities. Hundreds of updates have been pushed out. But as we look at conversations, we want to understand what is in the works, what's going on. I'm happy to announce that just a couple months ago, Office 365 with the worldwide team has published a public roadmap so we can find different pieces of information of what's happening. When we look at updates, customers and the partners, if you're registered as a partner of record as an administrator, will be notified of big updates that may impact. And as we look at those updates, you will have the opportunity to defer if necessary to make the appropriate adjustments in the environments. The typical deferment period is up to 1 year. We also have the Service Health Dashboard where we can find different pieces of information about what's going on with the services. As well as there's an admin app for the different phone devices that allow you to pull that same service health information. We also would encourage you to take a look at the Office 365 blog because we have a lot of announcements that come through the blog about what we are delivering to the marketplace. And then finally, a great resource for all partners to take a look at is the service descriptions. So as you take a look at the Office 365 service descriptions, many answers to a lot of the questions I receive in my inbox actually can be facilitated from the service descriptions. So again, highlighting key resources as we think about updates and continuity. Happy to announce we have the public roadmap available. Take a look at the Office 365 blog. We have some great utilities and tools as we think about the Partner Admin Center, Service Health Dashboard. Take a look at the app for the phone devices. And then finally, take a look at the service descriptions. So as we wrap up our session on how to pitch, we talked in the beginning about changing the conversation from feature, functionality, really cool things, to a business conversation and wrapping it around how we work and what we work with as we think about the ubiquitous collaboration, as we think about multi-generational support within the workplace, as we think about the multiple devices and how we can be productive across those devices. Then we went into a conversation about the Microsoft Cloud, the data center, which led us to the objection handling portion as we think about the top objections that we hear and how to address those effectively with your customers. So as we think about Office 365, I encourage you, if you're not familiar, to be familiar with some of the resources that we have in market, because quite honestly, it's not if, but when from the cloud perspective. And if you are not talking to your customers about the cloud, somebody else probably is. Security is a strength when we look at the Microsoft Cloud offerings, not a weakness. And again, this is just part of your training as we look at this session on how to pitch to your customers, but train hard, but fight easy. Thank you for your time today as we took a look at how to pitch to your customers with Office 365. And again, we thank you for your partnership with Microsoft. Have a great day.